Hey, what's going on, everybody? Justin here, and from my research into looking up some new releases, it looks like May is going to be an absolute banger of a month as far as nonfiction new releases goes, at least in like nature and history, the stuff I read and whatnot. But yeah, I think I had a list of 16 books, and I've whittled it down as best I can to like kind of my seven most interesting favorite ones that I want to get into. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. I think there's four kind of sciencey nature ones and three history ones. So we'll start with the nature ones first. So first up, we got The Light Eaters, How the Unseen World of Plant Intelligence Offers a New Understanding of Life on Earth by Zoe Schlanger. This one just looks really cool. Plant intelligence is definitely a topic that's kind of underrated, I think. Once you start learning about like the mycorrhizal connections with the fungi in the soil and stuff, in the roots between a lot of plants, trees, even like smaller plants and whatnot, it is pretty incredible. Just kind of the information exchanges and kind of the symbiotic relationships between like nutrients and stuff that these organisms have. But also just in general, even plants of the same species really sort of kind of can communicate with, to each other. Just for example, there are certain tree species when they're attacked by insects will release pheromones to other trees in the area to kind of bolster their defenses and stuff, and start like ramping up like chemical production to kind of like ward off insect predators for in the near future. So it's just really cool. I think plant intelligence, like I said, just we kind of think, oh, they don't have a nervous system, they don't have brains, this and that, but there's definitely a lot more there than meets the eye, and I'm kind of excited to read this one and just get even more of an understanding on that sort of thing. All right, next up we got The Birds That Audubon Missed. Discovery and Desire in the American Wilderness by Ken Kaufman. Now, Ken Kaufman, if you've seen any field guides, you've probably seen Kaufman field guides. They're kind of like a competitor to like Peterson field guides and whatnot. But Ken is also like a nature writer. I think he's written like another like 5 or 6, 7 books or something. And they're actually all pretty well regarded. And I haven't read any of them, so maybe this one will be the first one. Just obviously from the title, it's all about kind of the 19th century. I feel like 19th century history is like my vague theme of this year for some reason. If I do get to this one, this will be like the 6th or 7th one. Anyways, John James Audubon was an ornithologist and artist in the early to mid 1800s, who was trying to discover all the different like kind of birds and describe them and paint them in at least eastern North America. However, he did have a lot of competitors, and it's actually pretty rough and tumble. Like, it was pretty much the Wild West for the time being. I think actually one of the competitors, they say Alexander Wilson, I think it was, who accused him essentially of like stealing his art and descriptions and stuff and plagiarizing, which there is actually pretty good evidence that's probably the case. And I think Wilson's like protege or his like follower, I don't know if it was a family member or not. Actually, like, I think sued like the Audubon estate and all that kind of stuff over it. But even like, I think it's Charles Bonaparte, who's literally like, I can't remember if he's Napoleon's cousin or nephew. I think he's his nephew. Is actually like a naturalist in the new, in North America as well, just like going off and trying to discover birds and everything like that. But this book apparently is all about kind of going over some of the fanciful stuff they did. They were trying to outdo each other, so some of their descriptions were a little outlandish and probably just wrong, false, like they just made up stuff. I think there's even some cases of birds that Audubon painted that just don't even exist, and that's just not something we always like talk about. We always see like his like watercolor plate or his plates and everything, and like, oh wow, so awesome, and this and that. So I think it will be kind of interesting to learn about all the forgeries and falsified stuff. But I think this book is also dealing with kind of all the birds that a lot of these like naturalists just sort of passed over because they were just kind of like common birds, or birds that were just like not as flamboyant, not as interesting in one way or another, and they just kind of got overlooked for like decades until like more like boots on the ground scientists like were like, hey, we got these like warblers or finches or whatever it is as well. So I think it's just gonna be like kind of, if you like birds and stuff like I do, I think you'll enjoy this book as well. All right, so this next one I think is probably the one I'm most excited to read about, and it's kind of a weird book, but just bear with me for a second. It's Natural Magic: Emily Dickinson, Charles Darwin, and the Dawn of Modern Science, and this is by Renee Berglund. I don't actually know I kind of read the description. I still don't really fully understand what this book is about per se. But Emily Dickinson and Charles Darwin were rough contemporaries, during the first half or so Well, I guess, yeah, the first half into like kind of the second half of the 19th century. And I guess this is another like 19th century, but I probably should just make that a theme, I guess, for my reading this year. And it's all about sort of the interplay between science was starting to kind of come into its own, obviously, like Darwinian, theories of like evolution and stuff in the later portion of when he actually started publishing and stuff. Once Russell Wallace was like, yeah, I'm gonna start publishing too, and then he was like, oh yeah, we got like the same thing kind of going on. But like Lyell's geology kind of going, the Earth actually isn't like 8,000 years old or whatever, things like that. So I think this is kind of the interplay between science coming of age, sort of, along with all the other cultural things. So like with Emily Dickinson, she was actually pretty well versed, especially for a woman in 1800s America. I think she had studied like astronomy and botany or something like that, if I remember, in Amherst. And she uses a lot of that in kind of her poetry and writing stuff. And she's one of the only poets I've ever actually like read and didn't go, what the heck is going on back in school and stuff. Anyways, she kind of incorporates a lot of that sort of stuff. So I think the book is kind of like the interplay between science and then like, culture, poetry, literature, religion, all that kind of stuff, like throughout like the 19th century, when it's just like kind of a very tumultuous time for all that kind of stuff. I don't know. It just sounded really good. And I'm afraid that's the best description I can kind of give you. But I don't know, I'm really interested in this. Is probably like, if I could only pick one of the 7, this would probably be like number 1 if I had to guess. The Light Eaters might be a close second, but yeah, I would say I'd probably go with Natural Magic just to kind of expand like my thoughts on different things. And then lastly, for kind of a nature, this one's kind of like a nature travel-ish kind of one, is Amphibious Soul: Finding the Wild in a Tame World by Craig Foster. Now, Craig Foster, I think, is the one who wrote My Octopus Teacher like a year or 2 ago. That was really, really well regarded, that I need to get to as well. But this book is all about his sort of thoughts on how a lot of like wilderness, a lot of like the natural world has become, like our lives in general, but also even like I said, the natural world has become very tame. Like our experiences in it are very, I guess, I don't want to say scripted, probably isn't like the right word, but it's very curated. Like, there's not a lot of wildness like left that humans can experience and stuff. And I think it's all about sort of learning not to forget that, and like, what we can do to kind of broaden that kind of aspect of things. So I don't know, I always feel like people definitely need to get outside more and do a lot more things. I don't think he necessarily means everything's got to be like crazy and dangerous, though I think some of its experiences are, like scuba diving, and I think there's something about dealing with crocodiles, if I read like a little vignette somewhere. But anyways, like I said, it's kind of about the interplay. I feel like I've said interplay like a zillion times in this video. I probably have. I'm too lazy to edit that out. But anyways, the kind of, like I said, people being able to go out, actually experience wildness, experience like real nature rather than just kind of a curated park or something. And like I said, I live in the middle of the woods, so I feel like I have like a kind of a special like privileged position in that sense. I know it's like growing up in the I guess my city wasn't like the big city, but growing up in a very urban, suburbia, trailer park kind of crazy stuff, and then out here now where it's just in the middle of nowhere. I definitely feel like a lot of people don't realize how much is potentially out there. So yeah, definitely I will probably be giving this one a shot if I ever see it. Alright, and so now moving on to a few history books. We can't escape Rome. I don't think we ever can. Though I've been on the lookout for a lot of medieval books, and I just haven't been finding like a lot of medieval books coming out for some reason recently. Usually there's more medieval than classical, but like right now there's a lot more Greco-Roman stuff than, I guess, medieval. So I guess I'll take what I can get, and I don't really have any complaints with Greek and Roman books. Anyways, the first one here is Enemies at the Gate: The City Walls of Ancient Rome by Patricia Southern. And this just looked like kind of a cool lens to look at the city of Rome and like Roman history through the walls of the city itself. I don't think I've ever read anything quite like that. The original old walls, maybe by Romulus or something like that. But the Servian walls under King King Servius Tullius as well, are generally kind of like considered like the old walls, you know. I don't know if those ones only circled the Palatine or not. But anyways, it kind of, you know, over time they expand and whatnot. But like, for example, the ones that still stand are the Aurelian ones, which during the crisis of the 3rd century, when just all hell was breaking loose, Aurelian was like one little anchor out of that like half century of just like absolute chaos. I think there was like, you know, 40 emperors in 50 years. So I think he was like 12 or 15 though, like right in the middle of that. So that tells you something about the reigns of the other ones. His walls actually are still like roughly standing and stuff, though I do think Honorius, like 100 years later, started to add to it as well. But I think it's also about kind of the different threats that the city of Rome also faced. You know, obviously it was sacked by the Gauls, and that would have been what, 390 BCE if I remember. I think so. Under, was it Brennus? I believe it was. Anyways, and kind of how that shock, I was gonna say culture shock, it wasn't really a culture shock, that military shock really kind of put things into place for like, you know, the old school Romans, when it was just like kind of a city state and maybe like the surrounding hinterlands and stuff, and then all the way dealing up with sort of the different sieges from the Goths in the 5th century, obviously with the Ostrogoths sacking the city, or no, Visigoths, excuse me, sacking the city in 410 under Alaric. Obviously that's the big one. And I think it kind of goes on into kind of later periods as well. Like I said, it just sounds like a cool, interesting way to look at the city of Rome. I've just never really, like, the walls generally don't get a big look at in the city itself, because they were, I think even in like the Pax Romana era, the most of it was, I wouldn't say dismantled, but they weren't like really, they let them go kind of just because there wasn't really any reason to upkeep them. But yeah, I just think it'd be a cool lens to look at Roman history through. And then we got a Greek one that sounds really cool for me anyways, is Out of One Many, Ancient Greek Ways of Thought and Culture. And this is by Jennifer Roberts. And this is about how all, from what I understand, all the different poleis of the Greek city-states, I guess the poleis of the Greek city, that doesn't even really make sense, the poleis are the Greek city-states. Anyways, all the different poleis of the Greeks, what actually they had in common. We read a lot about how they were different. And the problem is, I think partly, you know, we read about Athens a lot and we read about Sparta a lot. And those two are about as far apart as you can get, but both of them are just like completely weird compared to like pretty much all the majority of the other poleis. Just very, very, just completely bizarre. You know, you have just totally free democracy, like, you know, like mob democracy on Athens, and then you got like a dual monarchy when like no one else has monarchies. It's just very bizarre, plus like all their other like stuff kind of going on anyways. But this is all about how, I guess, all the different cultural things, you know, all around the Mediterranean world kind of connected all the different Greek city-states, you know, between like Massalia, which would be like in southern France. There's, you know, Greek trading ports in Iberia, you know, the Iberian Peninsula, you know, Turkey, you know, the entire Mediterranean world. They're still all connected by kind of a shared culture and stuff. And I think it's kind of highlighting what these sort of things were. So if you like kind of cultural histories and social histories and stuff, I think this one's going to be really, really cool. And then lastly, we have The Cleopatras, The Forgotten Queens of Egypt by Lloyd Llewellyn Jones. And I honestly feel at this point, we're starting to get into like a cottage industry of writing books on Cleopatra. I think I can like name like 6 or 7 just like off the top of my head for some reason. I don't know. I feel like every book too is talking about how there's not much on her, but I just feel like every year there's a new one. But the only reason I'm interested in this one, and I've passed up on a bunch of the other ones, is it's by Lloyd Llewellyn Jones. I read his book, The Persians, I think the beginning of last year, and it was super fantastic. So pretty much anything he's gonna write on like the ancient world, considering he wrote like a nice, just 1 volume, like overview of the Persian Empire, just really good. I will probably be reading other stuff he writes on ancient history. I do kind of like the slant on this one that hopefully it's the entire kind of Ptolemaic dynasty. Just the Cleopatra everyone's familiar with you know, Caesar and Mark Antony is Cleopatra the 7th, and there were, you know, several other Cleopatras. Unfortunately, like kind of learning a lot of Ptolemaic stuff. There's so many Ptolemies and so many Cleopatras, it kind of just all starts jumbling together. So maybe this will kind of like I don't know, clarify a lot of that, you know, muddiness, I suppose, in the lineages and kind of like what's going on in, you know, ancient Egypt during kind of, you know, like I said, during the Ptolemaic dynasties. So, I don't know, it sounded really interesting in that sense, though. Like I said, I still feel like there's too many books on Cleopatra compared to pretty much all these other, like, ancient Greco-Roman figures. But there you have it. Those are 7 books coming out in May 2024. I think are going to be really cool for nature and history nonfiction. Let me know which one sounds the most interesting to you. And if you know a really cool book coming out this month, let me know in the comments down below as well. I'm always on the lookout for great recommendations. But whether you're reading a new release or not, always remember, read victoriously.